Radio, welcome back. So, this is next week's episode. So, last week we went through the benefits of building muscle and probably why you should maybe think about doing it at least once in your lifetime. Yeah. So, now what I'm going to go through is how to build muscle, what the three main areas we want to look at, and I'll go through each area in quite a lot of detail. And what we're trying to achieve with this, or what I'm trying to achieve, is help you understand what a good amount of growth is over a longer period of time, which I'll go through in the back end of this video, so stay tuned for that. But I'm going to go through the three main areas that you need to nail down if you want to build some muscle, right? So first of all, we'll go through body fat percentage, because that's kind of where we are round about finished off. And I kind of explained the male and female version of like body fat percentiles. So if we first look at males, yeah, and I'll just put female here. So the body fat percentage ideally a male wants to get down to in order to build muscle is 10 to 15%. And that's down to insulin sensitivity, as you'll have probably listened to in the last video. If you've not, just go back to that last video, watch that, because it's very important, and then come back to this. But we want 10 to 15%, and that's the leaner someone is, male or female, the more insulin sensitive they're going to be, which basically means they're going to be able to utilize nutrients more effectively, mainly carbohydrates, right? We'll be going through that in the calorie section though. So if you're above this percentile, then your first point is to do a diet until you get to this point. And the same with females. Females want to be ideally between that 15 to 20% mark. Yeah, and the same here. If you aren't at this body fat percentage, then you want to do a diet until you are, right? So there's body fat image charts online. If you search male body fat image chart, you'll find that. And the same with female. And you can just take some photos of yourself and compare your current self to the body fat image chart and look at 10 to 15% as a male and 15 to 20 as a female, and then see where you're at, right? How long it would take for you to get down to these percentiles will depend on where you're at the minute. If you're a male and you're 40%, it's going to take quite a while, obviously. If you're a female and you're 40%, it's going to take quite a while. So you're going to be in a dieting phase for quite a while. But this is one thing that you can still look at, so still stay tuned even if your body fat percentage is higher than these, because the training section is going to be relevant no matter what, right? So what I would advise is, if you're not at this percentile, right, what you want to do, regardless of if you're a male or a female, is do an 8 to 12 week dieting phase. I'll put DP, and the same here. Because after that 8 to 12 week dieting phase, you can then reassess and see how close you are to these body fat percentages. And then what I would do after that is I would do 2 weeks, so 2 week at maintenance. And the same here. Yeah, I'll do this, same as. Because what this 2 week maintenance phase does, and this is very important, is this will allow you to have a psychological break from restricting calories and dieting, yeah? So we want to do 2 weeks at maintenance calories to give us mind and body a rest from dieting. And then if you're not at this body fat percentage, you do another 12-week diet. And you keep doing that cycle until you get to these body fat percentages. And then when you're there, what you want to do when you're at this body fat percentage, you want to then aim to gain a little bit of weight every week, right? And this will all be dictated by your calories, which I'll be going through in a second. But what you want to do, regardless of if you're a male or a female, you want to aim to gain 0.25 to 0.5% of your total body weight per week. Right? So for example, say if someone is, I'm going to have to get on my knees here. So say if someone is a 200 pound male, then 1% of 200 pound, so 1% is 2 pounds. 0.5% or 0.5% is 1 pound, and 0.25% is 0.5 pounds. So a 200 pound male at 10 to 15% body fat would want to gain 0.5 to 1 pounds of body weight per week. And that's on average, right? So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, where you're going to have to track data, yeah? So you want to gain if you're a 200 pound male or female and you're between these body fat percentages, you'd want to gain 0.5 to 1 pound of body weight per week. If you're struggling to work that out, please drop a comment in the comment section and I'll get back to you and help. But then you want to gain this amount of weight on average per week over a longer period of time, right? So in order to gain muscle tissue, you ideally want to aim to gain muscle tissue for a minimum of 6 months to see any form of difference, right? So you want to do this for a 6 month period. Let me kneel down again. So 6 months minimum, right? And if you work that out, if you'd want to gain 1 pound of body weight per week for 4 weeks, which is a month, that'd be 4 pounds. So over 6 months, if you do 4 times 6, that equals 24. So you'd want to gain 24 pounds of weight over a 6 month period, right? That's at the most, maximum. Minimum would be half of that, would be 12. So you'd want to gain 12 to 24 pounds over that length of time. And then you'd want to assess where your body fat percentage is, because you're going to gain a little bit of body fat. Fucking hell, if we didn't, it'd be easier. Everyone would do one diet and then they'd be sweet, but that unfortunately doesn't work like that. So you'd assess where you're at, body fat percentile, after a 6 month gaining phase, and then maybe you might do another 8 week dieting phase to get you back to here or here, yeah? So that's step one, yeah? Assessing this, where you're at, dieting if need be to get to this, and then aiming to build a little bit of weight each week over a 6 month period, yeah? So then you might be thinking, well, you probably are thinking, what the fuck do we do with calories, right? So we'll use 200 pound as an example. So anyone who's 200 pound and between this amount of weight, what ideally you should do is go to a TDE calculator online and put in all your metrics, yeah? So it'll ask you for your height, your weight, your age, your activity levels, and then that'll give you your total daily energy expenditure. So your total daily energy expenditure is basically the amount of calories that you'd burn per day doing everything that you're doing, i.e. steps and cardio, being the weight and height and age that you are, right? So for example, say if a 200 pound male, I've not worked this out, I'm just guesstimating, but you can work this out for yourself. So I'm not telling fibs here, but say a 200 pound male burns 3,500 calories a day. So if you burn 3,500 calories a day, in order to build muscle, you want to eat at least 3,500. Because can we build muscle at maintenance calories? Yes, right? Will we build more in a surplus? Probably, yeah? More than likely, right? So a 200 pound male, if their maintenance calories is 3,500, they'd want to eat at very least 3,600 to gain weight, right? Would they gain much on this? Probably not. So ideally, I would probably put someone around about 3,750-ish. So they're in a 250 calorie surplus per day. And then we'd see whether they gain between this amount of weight. So I'd assess whether this male, we'll call it a male or female, gains between 0.5 to 1 pound of weight per week, right? If they do, brilliant. We keep everything as it is, right? And you keep calories consistent until your rate of gain goes below this. So for example, say after 2 weeks, so they've been at 3,750 for 2 weeks. Say if the weight stalls, which it probably wouldn't, but let's say it did, right? Because remember, the body's not that adaptable. It won't adapt so quickly. I always find that maybe after a month, maybe even 6 weeks, you'd have to change calories. People kind of probably push them a little bit too much too quickly, in my honest opinion. So say if then after 2 weeks, say he gains 0.7 of a pound here, and then here he gains 0.4 of a pound. So this is just under this, right? What I would do personally is I would leave it another week, right? And then if after that week he gains 0.3 pound, yeah, then I'd probably be like, cool, this guy needs a bit more food. So I'd maybe go 3,850. And I'd only bump up 100 calories each time because I would rather it's slower and sustainable and therefore keep body fat levels as low as possible, still gonna gain body fat though, yeah, for a longer period of time. Because remember, you've got 6 months, you've got a long time, yeah? So then that's about calorie bumping, yeah? Because you kind of wanna push up, I honestly think 5% of your calories is the maximum. So like, 10% of these calories would be like 380. 5% of that would be 180, yeah? I've gone even lower than that. I would rather do that myself. Right, so then if we look at macronutrients and we look at macros, right, and we think about protein, carbs, and then fats. What do we do with these, right? Ideally, I always keep protein around about 0.7 grams, not pounds, 0.7 grams per 1 pound of body weight. That's very messy, but you know what I mean. So I normally keep it 0.7 grams per 1 pound of body weight. So if we work that out for a 200 pound person, 1 gram per pound of body weight would be 200, yeah? If we think about that at 0.7, this is really putting my math head on here, but 0.7 would be around about 140 grams of protein minimum, right? The reason I do that is because protein is the hardest to break down and digest. It takes the longest. So if we push protein up too quickly too soon, then we're going to probably run into an appetite or digestion issue too soon or too quickly, right? And then if we look at fats, I always, again, like putting 0.8 grams per 1 kg or 2 pounds per 2 pounds of body weight, right? So if we think about that, what's the amount of fats for this person who's 200 pound? It'd be around about 80 grams of fat as a maximum, right? We need fats, so we need dietary fat in order to help with sex steroid hormone production because fats are the backbone. So fats are, when they're broken down, the backbone of cholesterol. So cholesterol is derived or converted through dietary fat being broken down. And then cholesterol is the backbone for all our sex steroid hormones. Sex steroid hormones being testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, cortisol, aldosterone. These are sex steroid hormones and we need to, well, they're created through eating dietary fat. So that's why this is important. But we don't want to go too high dietary fat because if we do, again, we'll run into potential digestive issues because fats slow down gastric emptying, right? Carbs, what do carbs do? Carbs fill up the rest. Fill up calories. So, if we work this out, right, 140 grams times 4, because there's 4 calories per gram of protein, right? So that means our calories of protein are 560, if I'm not wrong. Yes, I'm right. And 80 times 9, because there's 9 calories per 1 gram of fat, if we work that out, that is 720. I'm getting good at maths here, right? So if our guy has 3,750 calories, so 3,750 is the target, and we add these two together, so 560 plus 720 equals, this is now going to test me, so that equals 1,380, I think. Yeah? So the amount of calories, the 140 grams of protein and 80 grams of fat comes to is 1,380, I think. Let me just work that out. No, 1,280. I'm wrong, right? So that means that we have around about 2,500 calories. It'd actually be 2,480 or 2,470 of carbohydrates. So then this divided by 4, because there's 4 calories per 1 gram of carbs, right? This divided by 4 means that the individual would have 625-ish grams of carbs. So his macros would be 140 protein, 625 carbs, and 80 fats. And that would equal around about this. Doesn't have to be perfect. That is definitely not perfect, but I hope that gives you an insight, right? The reason why carbs are so high is because carbs, if someone's insulin sensitive, they're going to be able to utilize carbs effectively. Because what insulin sensitivity means, it means that your blood glucose is lower so that you can shuttle nutrients, i.e. carbohydrates or glucose, into a muscle cell and help it, and it be utilized as a fuel source, and it helps build a little bit of muscle, etc. So that's why these are higher, because an individual here or here can tolerate more carbohydrates, right? Obviously, being a 200-pound guy, he's quite a big guy, right? So he can probably stomach this amount of calories and these amount of macros, right? So then after that, another reason actually, sorry, just to explain, carbs are the quickest and easiest broken down. I think most carbohydrates will be broken down within a 30-minute period of it being chewed, swallowed, and broken down through the gastrointestinal system. So that's what you'd do with your macros. That's how you'd increase, and that's how you would go off based around a rate of gain per week, right? I would assess every month on how much you've gained over that month, because if you think this guy who's 200 pound would want to gain 2 to 4 pounds per month based around this, yeah? So if he gains 2 to 4 pounds per month, then we'd want to look at that over a monthly period. And say here, he gained 0.6 pound. So over the month, he's gained within that 2 to 4 pound rate of gain. So that'd be a month ticked. Be a perfect month, yeah? It never has to be perfect, yeah? Like, I'm giving you all these numbers, and I know it's a lot of like maths equations and stuff like that, which can be a little bit confusing, but the basics of it is you want to have a marginal rate of gain, you want to be insulin sensitive, you want to ideally modulate protein and fats to help with digestibility, and you want to fill up the rest of the calories with carbs. Then this one is the most important training, right? Why is it the most important? Because if you're insulin sensitive and you eat enough food, that ain't going to grow muscle on its own. Training's the stimulus that grows muscle, right? So if we look at training and we split it, my pen's going to run out, I think. We split it into 2 sectors, right? Section 1 is progressive overload. Overload. Section 2 is training to failure. So I'll just put failure. So if at the beginning, when I said you're not at these percentiles and you may be a little bit higher, and I said at the end, training will be more important, this is the one thing I'm going to say to you. Even if you're in a calorie deficit, and even if you're not eating enough to build muscle, if you're progressing your lifts and you're pushing towards that failure point and you're in a calorie deficit, can you still grow muscle? In my opinion, yes, for a certain period of time. Maybe not for the full dieting phase, but maybe for a short period at the beginning of your dieting phase, you can do. So that's why this is super duper important no matter what phase you're in, yeah? So progressive overload means, let's hope this does not fucking die, but progressive overload means getting a little bit stronger each week, right? And this is where people get confused, right? So it's where strength increases weekly, right? But that does not mean that you should be putting a 5 kilo or 10 kilo plate on the exercise every single week. You will shorten your range of movement and you will probably get injured, and therefore you will grow fuck all muscle, right? So how do we gain a little bit of strength every week with progressive overload? There's 2 ways. You either get a little bit stronger by just lifting the same weight as last week, but for 1 more rep, or you lift the same reps as last week, but add a little bit more weight, right? How I would do this is, say we have 3 sets. 1, 2, 3. And you do a warm up. I'll put WU, fuck me, couldn't think then. WU for warm up. So you do a warm up set at first, so you get blood into the muscle and you don't get injured and etc. Set 1, if you've got 3 sets, I'm not saying do 3 sets, but I'm just using 3 sets as an example, right? Say set 1, you do 40 kg, and say your rep range is 8 to 12. So you do 40 kg and you do it for 8 reps, right? Perfect. That'd be a perfect set for set number 1. Why? Because you've lifted the maximum amount of load for the minimum amount of reps in your rep range. Perfect, right? Because you know that is the most amount of weight you can lift on that given exercise for the lowest amount of reps. Perfect, right? Then set 2, say you do 38 kg and you do 10 reps. Perfect. So then set 3, you do 38 kg and you do 9 reps, right? As you can see, I've gone down in weight and lower rep range here, midway through the rep range, and then 1 less. Perfect. The only thing is with this is you've got to be pushing towards this failure point. If you've got 10 reps in reserve there where you're literally pushing, doing a shoulder press, and you're just like, yeah, I'm getting towards 8 reps. Oh, that was hard, it started burning. And then you just go, that was enough. You're gonna grow no muscle. None whatsoever. Remember, the failure point comes when the concentric part of the movement, or the positive, or in a shoulder press, the push up slows down. So for example, say if I push up in a shoulder press for my 7th rep, and then I control down, and then I push up again and it slows down, that's when I know when I'm near failure. But remember, failure is when you fail. It's not when you scrape a rep. Yeah, it's when you actually cannot push or pull any further. Yeah? And the reason that's important is because then that's when you get towards failure, within the last 3 reps towards failure, them are the most stimulating reps that are gonna cause muscle growth. And if you don't get to them 3 reps, I'm afraid you're gonna build, I'll say it again, fuck all muscle, right? So in terms of this, say this was week 1, pen's going, and say this is week 2. And then say I have the same rep range, obviously I do the same exercise. The next week, I'm just gonna try and do 40 kg for 9. And then I'm gonna try and do 38 kg for 11 in my second set. And in my third set, I'm gonna do 38 kg and I'm gonna try and get 10, right? So as you can see there, through that progression model, I've literally got 3 reps stronger. That's how you progressively overload properly, yeah? But you've got to fucking push towards failure. That is where everybody falls short with growing muscle. Whether you're in a dieting phase at maintenance or in a surplus, you've got to push towards failure. Because if you don't, you will not grow any muscle. And that's where everyone fails. Because you can progressively overload and you can do this and say, if I progressively overloaded in this way, but then was 5 reps shy of failure, I'd grow no muscle. Doesn't matter if I'm progressing I'm progressing each week. If I'm not pushing towards that failure point, it's irrelevant. So you've got to learn to push yourself to failure. And how you do that is through mentally pushing through that sticking point where you'd have potentially stopped last week. I always say, remember, say to yourself, when you feel like you've not got another, tell yourself you've got one more. And if you get that rep, tell yourself you've got one more. And if you get that rep, tell yourself you've got one more. Remember, the only reason people don't push to failure is because mentally they feel like they've done enough, is number 1. 2, they feel like, oh, I've trained hard enough and that's okay, yeah? Number 3, or number 4, they physically are scared of pushing towards failure because they're scared of like the bar falling on them. So obviously, when you're pushing towards failure, you want to do it in a safe way. If you're doing a back squat where you could potentially get injured, I don't want you failing on a back squat. If you're doing a leg press where potentially it could crush you, I don't want you pushing to failure, but you can definitely go to 1 rep in the tank, yeah? Any pulling movements, you can go to failure, yeah? So this, all in all, is how you would build muscle in a progressive way. But remember, no matter what phase you're in, these 2 are the most important. And this is the most important of all. You can eat in a surplus, you can be in good shape, but if you don't push to failure and you don't progressively overload, that is where you'll go wrong. The only way to do this properly is by tracking your training and know what you lifted last week. So that's everything for YouTube video this week. Drop a comment if you've got any questions and I'll answer all your comments. Let me know any other topics you would like me to cover. Next week, I'll be going a little bit more into building muscle and a little bit more into training. So thank you for listening, everyone, and I'll see you all next week.